Okay. We continue with from text to discourse. Remember, last week we talked about sentence meaning and utterance meaning. And how would you summarize the main message? What was the main insight you gained from what we said about from sentence meaning to utterance meaning? If you wanted to put it in, well, a fairly simple statement. Come on. What did you learn? What was your key insight from sentence meaning to utterance meaning? If you can't provide an answer to this question, then we don't need to move on. So who is going to save us? Yes?
That sentence is like the linguistic meaning, and with utterance you gave the whole context around it?
Yes. Yes, so context. Context is the key word here. Sentence meaning, in that case, we focus on meaning as far as meaning is specified by the words and syntactic structures that are used in the sentence. And if you look at how people in everyday life would talk about the meaning of sentences or even the meaning of texts, they seem to all agree that what you understand and what you need to understand when you understand a sentence is given with this sentence, is incorporated in this sentence, is specified by the words and syntactic structures and intonation and all these things, is given with the sentence. That is how we would normally, from an everyday life understanding of these things, would approach this. And that would be our everyday model of how these things work. Okay? And what we did last week was that gradually we identified what we then called contextual effects. We identified parts of what we understand, which we can only understand insofar as we have access to the communicative situation in which this sentence was uttered. Could you briefly characterize this using relevance theory and the model we depicted here? How does this work according to relevance theory? Again, I only need very broad, very rough outlines. How does this work according to relevance theory? What do we do as listeners or readers of a sentence, of an utterance, when we understand it? Which processes are involved? In which ways do we have contextual effects? When you try to answer such a question, it's always easier to approach it with an example. Make it concrete. What was our example? What was our example? No idea?
Did you like the Shakespeare lecture?
And? Yeah, did you like the Shakespeare lecture? That was the question, and the reply, roughly?
Slow development of...
Yeah, the thematic development was slow, and my neighbor fell asleep. Okay, and now let's focus on this reply. First of all, what is the communicative intention? What does the person who gave this reply intend to convey?
That he did not like the lecture.
He or she. Yeah. So that the person did not enjoy the lecture at all. That's what we understand immediately, intuitively. We don't have to analyze these things in any greater detail. It's very fast, very easy. But now for us, the task is to understand how this works and what processes are involved. The thematic development was slow, and my neighbor fell asleep. Remember what we said before when we talked about sentence meaning. We said the meaning of a sentence is what? What is the term we use for something like the meaning of a sentence in the sense of who, what, where, when, why? Which term do we use? Proposition. That's the proposition of a sentence, or propositional meaning. Because in the meantime, we know that there are other types of meaning, like, for instance, illocutionary meaning, or illocutionary functions, which come in with speech-act theory. The propositional meaning of a sentence. What about the propositional meaning of the thematic development was slow and my neighbor fell asleep? Now, from a sentence perspective, we understand a few things, but some very important parts of the proposition we actually understand are missing. We don't have any counterparts in the linguistic means of expression that are used that would give us these parts. So what do we need to do? The thematic development. What is involved in this case? Maybe your injuries help you find the answer, or maybe not. They don't. Oh. So, what is the answer? The thematic... Yes?
Yeah, we have, for example, have to implicate meanings.
Yeah, implicature, that's yet on another level. First, we made an important distinction here between implicatures and explicatures. What are explicatures about? I gave you a kind of, juicy paraphrase of this.
We may flesh out an utterance to get propositional.
Yeah, that's the actual phrase was different. We flesh out what? Not the utterance. No. With the help of. But what do we flesh out?
The propositional meaning.
Yes, and the propositional skeleton. Okay, so if you don't take context and contextual information into account, you are able to retrieve something like a propositional skeleton, which is less than what you actually understand in terms of propositional meaning. The thematic development. Well, what is left open is which thematic development? There is a gap. Okay, that's why we talk about the propositional skeleton, which we need to flesh out. And this is where explicatures come in. And we have different, we distinguish different explicating processes, namely reference assignment, like in this case, which thematic development of the lecture, which lecture. The definite article works as something like a signal that it is given, the lecture. Which lecture? And now you need to look for, in your mind, you look for this kind of lecture that you can fill into this slot. And of course, it's the Shakespeare lecture and the thematic development of this lecture. That's reference assignment. Okay? You need to find an entity that fits in here. And that is, you fit it in as part of your mental cognitive processes. My neighbor. Okay? We need to disambiguate this neighbor. What kind of neighbor? Next door neighbor or neighbor in the bench. Fell asleep. So what does this mean? Could be meant in a metaphorical sense or in a sort of concrete, literal sense. And my neighbor fell asleep. What about and? What did we say about and? What do we need to do in this case? Yes?
Whether end is the result of the slow development or if it's just an additional information.
Yeah. I mean, not whether and is the result, but whether and...
Means.
Yeah. Right. So whether we have a causal and or a temporal and then, and because of that, and in addition to that. Yeah. So these are different ends. And we don't get anything out of what the sentence gives us to find an answer. We need contextual information. We need contextual effects for fleshing out the propositional skeleton. Okay? So all these explicatures are pragmatic processes that make use of contextual information, background information, cultural information, specific subject information, depending on what kind of utterance you're dealing with and what kind of communication. Okay? And this fully fleshed out proposition, that is, in a way, the basis for the implicature, no, which is an entirely different proposition. Okay, so we have processes that deal with fleshing out the propositional skeleton, and we have inferences then which we call implicatures that that give us the intended, actually intended meaning, no, or yes, or whatever. Okay. Of course, the way I described it now, it looks as if we first do this and then we do that, which is in actual communication, in actual processing, not the case. We process utterances using several processes simultaneously at the same time, right? And sometimes, I mean, you don't really need to understand all the words someone is using, or you don't need to know them, know the meaning of all these words, and you get the intended meaning from the person's facial expression. And you know that the answer is no or yes. Okay. Okay. And this is now where the terminological distinction between sentence and utterance comes in. Okay. We speak of sentences if we refer to these units are stripped bare of contextual information, abstracted from real communication. And we speak of utterances as these units embedded within a communicative context. Okay? So in pragmatics, we are dealing with utterances. In syntax, we are dealing with sentences. We look at sentences and their syntactic structures. Okay, so keep this in mind. We now move on to texts. And texts, as you will see, are of the utterance type, not of the sentence type. Okay? the important question now is, what makes a text a text? What holds a text together? It is not syntactic structure, like in the case of sentences, but it's rather semantic relations, like in the case of utterances. And this is what we want to take a closer look at now, using a couple of examples. So this is an extract from Patricia Highsmith's Strangers on a Train. The train tore along with an angry, irregular rhythm. It was having to stop at smaller and more frequent stations where it would wait impatiently for a moment, then attack the prairie again. But progress was imperceptible. The prairie only undulated like a vast pink-tan blanket being casually shaken. The faster the train went, the more buoyant and taunting the undulations. Guy took his eyes from the window and hitched himself back against the seat. Miriam would delay the divorce at best, he thought. She might not even want a divorce, only money. Would there really ever be a divorce from her? Now, the question is, what holds this text together? Okay, I think we all here in this room would agree that this is a text and a textual unit. And the question is now, what is the force that makes this a unit? Can you give me some, looking through, reading through the text, can you give me some maybe expressions or something which you think contributes to the unity of this text? Why do you see it as a unit? Or don't you? You do, right? So why do you?
Well, for example, the first part is connected with the second with words like window and seat, because you can find those things in the train, so you know.
Okay, so the second part now.
Yeah.
Okay, window and seat.
So you know the person called Guy is inside the train.
But not if you have just this passage, right?
Yeah.
What? No.
We know that we're talking about the train.
Yes, that's it. All right. So when we read this paragraph here, this passage, we know already that the text is about a train. Okay. So when we read window and seat, we link it up with train, we link it up with what we know about trains, and it fits. We could easily construct a different context where window and seat would not be interpreted as a window in a train, of a train wagon, or seat in a train wagon. Right? So what else?
We know that Guy is thinking of Miriam, who's probably his wife. So when
Why is she? You say she is probably his wife.
well, she is his wife because he talks about divorce, and you can't get divorced if you're not married.
So yes. So what you need now here is lexical knowledge of what divorce means. Okay, and divorce implies that. If you want to get a divorce from someone, well, you need to be married to this person. Okay? So that comes in as part of our world knowledge, of course, but then as part of our lexical knowledge that fits here. Okay, so we can create this divorce frame. What else?
There are words such as but, which shall connect one sentence with the other, like but progress was imperceptible.
Okay, but progress was imperceptible. So what does the but do?
Refers to the previous sentence, to the sentence before this sentence.
Sentence?
To the sense, perhaps.
Yeah? So we need to talk about the meaning, right? We understand, we construct here on the basis of this text. So, but progress was imperceptible, then attacked the prairie again. In a certain way, but creates a link between the two propositions that are specified here. Okay. So what else? Other examples of where we intuitively, in this process of reading and understanding this text, where we create a connection, where we create a link.
In the first sentence we have the train, and in the second sentence we have it, and so we know, and we can guess that it refers back to the train, and so although it sounds a bit like impatiently, waits impatiently, that seems to point to living creature.
Yes.
But we know it's about the train, so you create a certain image. But you
Yes.
the train.
Yes. So the train is sort of like animated, personalized here. That's a different matter. The first thing you mentioned is immediately important in our context, the train and it. When you read, it was having to stop at smaller and more frequent stations. Well, would you know what it refers to? Well, you know a little bit, okay? So what do you know when you read, just read this out of context or without the previous utterance? It was having to stop at smaller and more frequent stations. What do you feel? What do you, yes?
Can't be a person because otherwise it wouldn't be an it.
So it can't be a person, right? More? Yeah, some kind of object. What do you get out of, well, the propositional meaning of this utterance?
It's probably some kind of vehicle
Why?
because it stops at stations, and you can only do that if you pick up people or something.
Yeah, why do you know that it's some kind of vehicle? Well, a station comes in, but then something else.
Yeah, it waits for somebody probably.
Yeah, well, if you take just, it was having to stop. So obviously, it was moving. That's a presupposition, by the way, right? Something can only stop if it was moving before. And something that moves and then stops at stations is a certain kind of vehicle. What kind of vehicle? Does it need to be a train, or could it be something else? Yes, could also be a bus, a Greyhound. Okay. So you get something out of this. But now in this text, when you read this utterance, it was having to stop. You have read what came before, so you have built up something like a mental model in your mind of what this text is about. That is your interpretation. And when you read it, well, then you know you need to look for something that it refers to. Okay? And in your mental model, it's quite easy and straightforward, the assumption that it refers to train. These things can be more complicated. Just think of a man. It's a story about a man and a boy. So a couple of utterances, the man and the boy, blah, blah, blah. And then he is doing certain things. And now you assume, because it was the man and the boy and then he, you assume, he refers to the boy, because that was the last person that was mentioned. And indeed, there is this strategic principle of local interpretation, yeah, where you try to make the shortest connection. Okay. But you can easily imagine that the story goes on a bit and you are given information that makes it clear that he did not refer to the boy but to the man. And then you have to reshuffle things in your mental model. Okay. So this is an interpretation process. You make inferences. Okay. You, in terms of relevance theory now, this would be reference assignment, right? So relevance theory takes a kind of micro perspective, and we are now looking at things from a macro perspective. Okay. Station, of course, fits with train. It fits with other things as well, buses and so forth, but it fits with train. So in this sense, we can make sense here and link parts in this text together. Prairie and prairie, so repetition, is also makes sense here and contributes to creating a textual unit. Undulated, and when you know what that means, then you see it fits in with a pink tan blanket being casually shaken, and buoyant, and undulations, and all these things. But it's never just the words and the grammatical structure. You always need to take in what you know about the world, what makes sense in the world, and these things. Okay. So, what holds this text together, what creates this textual unit, is something different from what holds a sentence together. In that case, we have syntactic structures. Okay. But here we have a web of semantic relations which we create in the process of understanding this text, with the help of the linguistic means of expression that are given, and our lexical and syntactic knowledge, but then very importantly, also with the help of our contextual knowledge and background knowledge. And these different types of knowledge and the processes based on them interact in complex ways in this process of understanding or trying to understand this sentence, this text, sorry. Let's take a closer look at reference assignment now in this text here. Douglas had given him the impression that some danger was hanging over his head, and he always looked upon his sudden departure from California and also his renting a house in so quiet a place in England as being connected with this peril. Who is he? How many people? 2? Why? Yeah, but why do we have, what is your evidence what is the evidence for your assumption that we have 2 people here? Why can't it be just Douglas? Yes? Why? Because otherwise it would have to be himself. Yeah? If it refers to Douglas, well then you would need to use himself, and Douglas had given him, meaning Douglas, would be incorrect grammatically. Okay, so there's a very strong signal here. So we have two people. But now so Douglas had given him the impression that some danger was hanging over his head. Whose head? Douglas's head or this other person's head? And he always looked upon his. Who is looking? Upon whose departure? And who's renting a house in England? How do you know?
Because Douglas doesn't need to tell the other person what he thinks, or what the other person thinks.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the alternative interpretation that it's the other person over whose head this danger is hanging, etc., is impossible? No. So it's just a sort of interpretative preference. Yeah, okay. But that's it. You cannot be sure on the basis of what is given here in this little text. But you are right. So this is how it goes on. He imagined that some secret society, some implacable organization was on Douglas's track, which would never rest until it killed him. Now, over whose head is this danger hanging? Yes, Douglas's head, but why? How do you know?
Because now the talk about secret society that tracks Douglas.
Yes. So when we do a propositional analysis here of these utterances, then we learn something about some danger which is hanging over somebody's head, and we learn something about this organization that is on Douglas's track and might kill him. And these two pieces of propositional information we can bring, and we actually bring together in our interpretation process, and that is how we know that it is Douglas's head over which this danger is hanging. And he always looked upon his, so he is this other person, and his sudden departure, which again fits in with danger and some organization being on this person's track, and renting a house in so quiet a place. So all these bits and pieces of propositional meaning fit together now. Okay, and you are able to create, and that is a magic word for us, a coherent interpretation. A coherent interpretation. Okay? Now look at this text here, taken from William Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. Through the fence between the curling flower spaces, he could see them hitting. They were coming toward where the flag was, and I went along the fence. Luster was hunting in the grass by the flower tree. They took the flag out and they were hitting. Then they put the flag back, and they went to the table, and he hit and the other hit. They went on, and I went along the fence. Luster came away from the flower tree, and we went along the fence, and they stopped, and I looked through the fence while Luster was hunting in the grass. Is there a problem? Or is this straightforward? Simple question, simple answer. Who is Luster? What is Luster? Who is Luster? Okay, that's one specific question. But in more general terms, is this text an ordinary text? Or is something funny, something bizarre, something remarkable? The hitting? Can't you... Okay, let's...
Yeah, the confusing thing about this text is that the two people who are hitting each other...
each other, yes.
aren't introduced, so we don't really know who they are, but the rest of the text is kind of straightforward. Everything is kind of chronological.
Yeah, I mean, what is interesting is that when you move from one utterance to the next, everything seems to be okay, right? On this local level, yeah? Through the fence, okay, between the curling flower spaces, I could see them hitting. Okay. I don't really understand what this means, I mean, this hitting business, but so far, so good. They were coming toward where the flag was, and I went along the fence, and so on. On this local level, from utterance to utterance, everything seems to be fine. But what is problematic here?
There are like several things going on at the same time.
Hmm?
There are like several things going on at the same time. Each sentence talks about something else.
Yes, okay, which is usually the case, but what is peculiar here? Or what's your own reaction as someone who tries to understand this text?
Yeah, the problem in my opinion is there are, it's more like a puzzle. There are sentences, and
Okay.
the utterance ended, and then the next one starts.
Okay.
We can't be really sure that all these sentences are really connected to each other.
Okay, so yeah, well, it's kind of a puzzle, you said, and well, we said on a local level they seem to fit together, but on a more global level, we don't really know how this all fits together, what this is about. Okay? So on a more global level, we don't understand, or it's difficult to grasp what this is about. Does anybody know what this is about? What the solution is? Anybody familiar with this novel? This is about playing golf. Okay? And once you know that this is about playing golf, everything is clear. Why? Because you know how golf is being played and what are the rules and what are certain ingredients and moves and all these things. If you don't know anything about playing golf, then this information that someone is watching other people playing golf wouldn't help you. But you do. Now, but still you might ask yourselves why William Faulkner wrote such a bizarre text. The Sound and the Fury is the story of three brothers who give an account of a certain series of events from their individual perspectives. And one of the three brothers, Benji, is mentally retarded. And that is Benji speaking. Okay? And it's a really neat strategy Faulkner is using for giving us as readers an impression, a feeling of how Benji sees the world. Okay? So it's not, what he understands is not entirely coherent. There are bits and pieces, but the overall coherence is, well, missing, or let's say is weak, is disturbed. Okay? So that is how this text works, and it shows us something very important about understanding texts and what makes a text a textual unit. The important message is, who creates the textual unit here? Who? Who does it? Who creates coherence? The reader. Reader or listener. That is you, us. First, without this golf information, you are not really able to create coherence in such a way that you are entirely satisfied. And then with this information golf, you are able to create coherence, and so that you are satisfied. So you do it. You do it with the help of your linguistic knowledge, which you need in order to analyze in an intuitive way the linguistic means of expression that are used in this text and their meaning contribution, but then also with the help of your contextual knowledge and background knowledge, in this case, playing golf. And if certain kind of knowledge is missing, then you cannot fully, or maybe not at all, understand a certain text. And maybe some people who have this kind of background knowledge are able to understand the text, and other people who don't have this information can't, or only to a lesser extent. So when we talk about coherence in relation to texts, we need to talk about readers and listeners and what they do. Okay. Kniend geschoren, an einer Deichsel zu neunt, des Hauptmanns Kopf in einem Weidenkorb, sein Rumpf steht aufrecht, setzt die Füße, wen erreicht, der kommt frei. Ich bin der 9., ein schlechter Platz, aber noch läuft er. So what is this? Yeah, you know the answer, Yeah, so if you know Störtebeker, then this comes to your mind quite fast. But if you don't know this kind of story, then you try to, it's a puzzle. It's a greater puzzle than this text here. You might even feel, well, this is not a text. It's rubbish, it's nonsense. Right? But provided you have the right kind of background knowledge, have read certain things, are familiar with certain stories and, well, anyway, cultural knowledge, background knowledge, all these things, you are able to piece things together. So it's all in the reader. It's all in the listener. Okay? Another example which supports this model. It's a recipe. Slice the onion finely, brown in butter, and then place in a small dish. Put the ground spices into a breakfast cup of water, add to the fat in the pan, and cook for 3 minutes, stirring the while. Now add the chicken, mix well, see that the meat is just covered by water, and boil for 20 minutes with the lid on the pan. When the liquid has almost evaporated, continue to cook, but stir the chicken till golden brown. Crush the browned onion with the spoon and add it to the chicken. Now, here you have chains of reference, right? Noun phrases and pronouns onion. You have, well, pronouns. You have also ellipsis. Slice the onion finely. Brown it, the onion, in butter. Brown in butter. So you have to fill in this gap with this onion. Then place it, the onion, in a small dish. And now it's about the spices and then the chicken. And it continues this way. Then at the end, you have the browned onion. You have to crush it with a spoon and add it to the chicken. Now, what is funny about this is that in this process of reference assignment, throughout this chain of reference, the entity to which it refers, or the noun phrase refers, or the entity that is for which we don't have an expression in the case of ellipsis, this entity undergoes dramatic changes. It's not the same entity anymore at the end. Slice the onion. Well, first you have it as a whole beautiful, almost living onion, and then you slice it. Ooh, you slice it. And then later you put it in the pan and you brown it, and then you crush it with a spoon. And it looks very, very different from the original onion. But you continue referring to it as the onion, it, and these things. Okay? Where do these changes take place? Well, you could say in real life when you do these things, but in the process of interpretation, they take place in your mind, in your mental model, in your interpretation. Right? I'm telling you this because in earlier models of text analysis and what was called texture, what holds a text together, a model by Halliday and Hasan from the mid-70s, they claimed that what we talked about now are a noun phrase and then a pronoun and ellipsis and a repetition of a noun phrase, all these things they call cohesive ties. We need to interpret it. We need to find an antecedent, and we managed to find the onion that was mentioned earlier in the text, and we create a link, a cohesive link. And these cohesive links in a text out there creates texture, this semantic web. Okay? And they argue, well, this is what gives unity to a text. But it's very easy to find texts which are perfect texts and which are seen as a unit, but which don't have these cohesive ties, which don't have sort of linguistic signals on the surface of the text. One famous example is a little dialogue, a little conversation. A says, the phone is ringing, and B replies, I'm in the bath. Now, it's perfectly simple. We all understand what is going on. This little text has coherence, but there are no cohesive ties in the sense of pronouns that pick up a noun or a noun that is being repeated or something like that. That is, where coherence is established is, as we said before, is in our mental representation of what we understand when we understand this text. And we have linguistic signals that support these assumptions of coherence, but they are neither necessary nor sufficient. We again always need contextual information, background information, and we need to do it. Okay? And when you look for an entity, for it, in this process of assigning reference, you usually don't look back in the text. You don't. You look into the mental model you have created in your mind at this point in your reading process. Sometimes you need to go back to earlier passages in the text when things are too complex and complicated, or when you pick up the novel again from yesterday or last week and you don't remember precisely what it was about, and then you read he, and you know who is he, and then you need to go back a few paragraphs in order to figure out. Everything's okay? Are you still with me? Am I still with you? Okay. So, we need to make a distinction in terms of models between text as object and text as process. And this is actually the distinction Brown and Yule make in their famous book, Discourse Analysis. They refer to the previous model by Halliday and Hasan as a model which looks at text as something out there. The reader is not part of the model. And textual unity is analyzed with reference to what is given in the text. But this only works to a certain extent. And such a model, for instance, could not deal with texts like the phone is ringing, I'm in the bath. Okay, so this makes it very clear that the model is not entirely adequate for dealing with texts and textual unity. And from the examples we looked at, we saw that it is more adequate to see text as a process in which readers are engaged. And it's in this process of understanding a text that readers create a coherent mental model. Another term would be interpretation of the text. And these assumptions of coherence I come up with as a reader are based on my linguistic knowledge, on contextual and social cultural knowledge, on pragmatic principles like, for instance, we mentioned earlier, local interpretation. Okay? So when I say something here, you try to interpret within the immediate context. If I wanted to talk about something we talked about last week, then, well, I'd better give it an explicit signal. Yeah, by the way, last week, and so. If I don't do this, then, well, you might try to interpret it within this situation, and then you misinterpret it, or maybe you are not sure what it might mean, and then maybe you ask, and so forth. Okay? Frames, scripts, schemata, these are terms that refer to models, again, models that are used for describing our world knowledge, in the broadest sense, world knowledge, as something which is structured. Our knowledge is not an unorganized heap of information, but it's organized in what is then called frames or schemata or scripts. For instance, if you take all the knowledge we have available regarding houses, okay? So what do we know about houses? What do you know about houses? No, what do you know about houses?
Buildings, people usually live in them.
Okay, people live in houses. What else? What else? You can buy them, you can sell them, yes? They have a roof, yes? What else? Sometimes they don't have a roof. What else? They, well, usually have walls, and in these walls, usually they have windows and doors and things like that. Yeah? So when you hear the word, the lexeme house, or when you encounter the lexeme house in a text, then this activates an entire frame of knowledge, bits and pieces, which do not all need to be the case, right? But it's very likely that when a house is mentioned, that this house has walls and a windows and a roof and maybe a basement and things like that. So when someone talks about a house and then continues talking about the definite article, the roof, the back wall, or something like that, then you know that it refers to this house. You activate your frame knowledge in order to create this link. Okay? Now, and this is where a very helpful terminological distinction comes in. And that is the distinction between text and discourse. When you look at the literature dealing with texts in linguistics or in literary studies, then you will find that these two terms, text or words, text and discourse, are sometimes used interchangeably. Sometimes some experts seem to have a preference for discourse and others seem to have a preference for text. Some people make a principled distinction, and one of them is Henry Widdowson. He makes a principled distinction between text and discourse, which I find very helpful for our purposes, and it's the following. One, we achieve meaning, he says, by using language to engage our extra-linguistic reality. So that is what I just talked about. I mention house, and then this helps you activate, or I, in a way, make you activate all the things you know about houses, that is extra-linguistic reality. Unless it is activated by this contextual connection, the text is inert, is dead. Yeah? It is this activation that I refer to as discourse. Discourse is the pragmatic process of meaning negotiation. Text is its product. Okay? So what is going on now between us is discourse. Okay? I try to convey something, communicate something, and you try to understand what I'm saying using your contextual and background information. by creating a mental model, an interpretation in your mind, which goes far beyond the meanings of the words and structures I use. Okay? So we talked about all these things. That is discourse. Now, imagine we have a sound recording, an audio recording, and we transcribe this audio recording, and we have a text, well, a spoken text, the audio recording, and we have the written text, just the transcript. And the transcript, the text, that is the linguistic manifestation of our discourse. That's how he distinguishes between these two terms. Discourse and the communicative activation of meaning, and text as the linguistic manifestation of discourse. Based on one text, we could have very different discourses. This is actually what happens when you look at, for instance, a Shakespeare play or his sonnets, and when you look at different readings, different interpretations, different discourses over the centuries. Okay? And when you translate a text, well, you translate it on the basis of what you understand. That is, you translate it on the basis of a specific discourse you create from this text, using your cultural knowledge, background knowledge, contextual knowledge. Okay? And now I hope it's clear what he means when he says that the text is inert unless it is activated by this contextual connection. Okay? Text and discourse. So let's take a brief look at how this works. That we manage to move from text, textual data, to discourse. It might be helpful to see texts as interfaces between people's minds. Okay, I can't look into your minds. I can sort of, probe into your minds. But to a certain extent, I can make you think in a certain way, along certain lines, to activate certain bits and pieces of your knowledge by using language. So when we communicate with each other using language, you could see this as having another person's mental worlds and communicative intentions by proxy. It's kind of mental modeling by remote control. I can control your mental modeling processes with my utterances. I can only do it to the extent that you let me do it. This is where cooperation comes in. But of course we have also types of communication where you have not agreed in letting someone control your mental processes. And this is in the case of commercials very often. This is in the case of propaganda. So these things. Now let's have a look at this sentence, this utterance. We know from previous analyses he was kept in a gruesome dungeon for 25 years. What do we do? First of all, there is what I would like to call lexical activation of cognitive content, world knowledge. So when you hear this utterance, read this utterance, there are certain words, dungeon, keep, dark, year. You have lexical knowledge available for these lexemes, and that enables you to activate, or enables me to make you activate certain bits and pieces of your cognitive content, of your world knowledge. Okay? So that is the first level that needs to be distinguished. And now with the cognitive content which is activated using lexical means, I now want you to do something. I want you to build certain scenes, certain events. This is where propositions come in. This is, of course, where syntax comes in. The propositional construction of a mental world. Who, when, where, why, etc. So this goes beyond. This is the mental, the cognitive stuff, knowledge stuff, which I make you activate. And then on a next level, using syntactic structures, word order, and these things, I make you put this together in a certain way to form propositional meaning, that is, in a propositional way to specify events and scenes. And on a third level, I then need to make you understand this with a certain communicative orientation. That is, I have specified a certain event, who, when, where, why, and now I want you to take this as a description, that is, as a statement about the real world, or I want you to take it as, well, as fiction. That is, I want you to create a fictitious world. I want you to take this as a warning. Tonight it will rain. And it's not just a statement about what is going to happen in the future, but I want to convey something else, namely, well, you better take an umbrella, or you better stay home, or something like that. Or make sure that the tents are safe. It depends on the context, on the situation. Or I mean it as a question, then I use a certain syntactic structure to signal this, or a certain intonation, or I intend it as a request. So here we have propositional meaning, illocutionary meaning, or illocutionary functions. But now, from the perspective of this process of mental modeling, it is about activating sort of knowledge, which is available to you as cognitive content. I need to make you build sort of propositions out of this knowledge, and I need to convey to you how to take it communicatively, namely as a description, or as a question, or as a request. And then finally we have the perlocutionary effect, namely that I create something like joy or fear or confidence, and maybe I intend this to happen, or maybe it just happens and it's out of my control, or something like that. Okay? So this is how you can bring what we talked about last week, how you can bring this together under the text discourse umbrella, and text as mental modeling, or utterances rather, as mental modeling by remote control. Okay, and now by way of a kind of summary, understanding texts means creating discourse in this terminology, which means constructing mental worlds, which means constructing discourse. I do it with the help of what is available to me. And you do it in a different way, because what is available to you is different. In a lecture or in any other conversation, it is never the case, it cannot be the case, that what I intend to convey to you is entirely the same as what you understand. In a lecture, sadly, the mismatch is usually very, very great. Yeah. So it's about constructing mental worlds, constructing discourse. What is involved in terms of knowledge is linguistic knowledge, contextual knowledge, world knowledge. And when I say world knowledge, I mean cultural knowledge or factual knowledge about, which we wouldn't call cultural knowledge, how houses are, what they look like, but it's part of our cultures, and also special subject knowledge and all these things. So it's a kind of umbrella term. And in terms of processes, it's about establishing coherence, that is, coming up with coherent discourse, a coherent interpretation. And cohesion refers to the signals that are given in the text in terms of reference, assignment, change of reference, chains of reference, repetition, and things like that. They help us create coherence on the level of discourse, but they are neither sufficient nor necessary. Back to an important question: what is our model of language? If you see language in this way, then it's a very, very different model than what we started with when we talked about language as a system of structures, the structuralist perspective, or when we talked about language as speakers, an ideal speaker listener's linguistic competence in the sense of a rule system and things like that. Now we have a model that is much wider, that incorporates the real speaker and real listener and the speaker's cognitive capabilities, the speaker's knowledge, linguistic knowledge and world knowledge. And the model incorporates processes, what you do with this knowledge. Bottom up and top down refers to when you read a text, on the one hand, your aim is a coherent interpretation. Your aim is to understand whether your addressee liked the lecture or not. Did you enjoy the Shakespeare lecture? And you achieve this goal through an interaction of bottom-up and top-down processes. On the one hand, you analyze incoming data, that is, with your linguistic knowledge, that is bottom-up, and you try to get out of this data all you can get in terms of meaning contributions for your interpretation process, and at the same time, You create meaning expectations, hypotheses, using your background knowledge, using your knowledge about a certain person you talk to, and these two processes, bottom up and top down, together, they make you, in the end, create a coherent interpretation, create coherent discourse. Okay, that's it. This is just a summary of all the components. And now maybe a few questions concerning the final assessment. Or not? Is everything clear? So I wish you, what shall I wish you? Have fun, eh?